Welcome to another episode of Beyond Physical, where we talk about the mental, emotional, social, and at times spiritual benefits of exercise. We believe that exercise is more than movement, and this podcast is our attempt at sharing that message with the world by sharing our own as well as our guests' experiences and knowledge. If you enjoy it, we ask that you please spread the message by leaving a rating and review, or even better, by sharing with a friend. Welcome everyone to another episode of Beyond Physical. Today, as you can see, if you're watching, is a solo ep, and as you'll hear shortly, there'll be no one else on this episode, but we're going to go into something that I get asked a lot about, and that has become somewhat of a trendy kind of buzzword or buzz phrase in the health and fitness sphere in recent times, which is hybrid training. You've had the advent of a whole bunch of, well, specifically high rocks, so fitness racing event that incorporates different elements of fitness, so like strength, endurance, and speed. And you've also got on social media a lot of people posting about different forms of hybrid training. So just to kind of shed a light on what that actually is. So hybrid training, for the most part, is a mixture of various exercise modalities, but the most popular form at the moment is endurance training, so running, so long distance running and lifting. And I think the reason why it's become so popular and of such high interest to people is that typically if you can run far, you are not the strongest, and if you are very strong, you typically can't run very far. So it's this dichotomy where you have this person who's kind of a mixture of the two, and that makes it quite cool. But on the surface, what it basically equates to is like being somewhat competent in both. So you can run a lot, or cycle a lot, or swim a lot, and you can also lift quite a lot in the gym. Why this has become something that is kind of very popular, as I said, is probably because it's out of the norm. It's got a lot to do with changing the narrative around what it means to be fit and how fit you can be, because usually people would be like, if you run far, it's impossible to lift heavy weights. If you look at the top marathon runners, they're usually quite small. If you look at sprinters, it's a bit different, but then again, they're not running far. They're very muscular, they're very powerful, they're generating a lot of force. So they must be strong, because the way that they're moving requires them to generate a high amount of force. And then if you also go look at your strength athletes, like your power lifters, your strongmen, they are not your kind of poster children for long distance running. So I think it's also interesting for people because of the paradigm that we have around either being an endurance runner or being someone who lifts a lot. It's kind of like people understand, on the surface how to do one or the other, but it's probably quite difficult for a lot of people how to marry the two. And also, just a side note, hybrid training, in my opinion, can comprise of any 2 or 3 or 4 different exercise modalities. If you are competent in more than one thing, I feel like you could consider yourself a hybrid athlete. But anyway, I think what makes it challenging at the outset is building endurance and gaining strength require types of training that can be conflicting. So if you want to build endurance, you're expending a lot of calories, you're running a lot, you're kind of out in the mountains or on the roads doing your endurance training. And this is something that has often been kept at an arm's length by strength athletes, because when you're trying to build strength, you're trying to, from a nutrition standpoint, be in what's called a calorie surplus. So you're eating more or consuming more energy than you're spending, because this allows your body to recover sufficiently. It allows your body to build strength and muscle. And this becomes a lot more challenging when you're doing more activity. So if you're running more, it's a lot more challenging to get in sufficient food to build strength. But there are ways to do both. And there are ways to do both concurrently. There are many ways to go about it, but I personally believe that looking at things from a holistic point of view, as one big system, and letting your strength training and your endurance training work together is the best way to ensure that you build strength and endurance. Personally, in terms of what kind of hybrid training has looked like for me, I have kind of been fortunate enough to do some really cool lifts
whilst at the same time, doing these ultra endurance runs and marathon builds and things like that. And I haven't found that I've lost strength throughout these preps. For instance, my all-time best bench press, which was a 180 kilogram single, was 5 weeks after I ran 100k in the Drakensberg, and that was a 16-week prep. So I'd been prepping for an ultra run for 16 weeks, and 5 weeks after that I hit my best bench press, and that was something like it was a 30 kilogram PR. So the last time I tested my 1 rep max was maybe 5 months prior. And over that 5 month period, whilst prepping for the ultra, I managed to put 30 kilograms on my bench press. And I can attribute this to 3 things. So number 1 is lifting frequency. So I was bench pressing 2 to 3 times a week, 2 of them being heavy. So one of them being a standard flat bench, another being a variation. So either a banded, like assisted kind of bench, or a close grip bench. Or a pause bench, so any sort of like bench press variation to vary it, but it was 2 heavy bench press sessions, and then I might do a third one, which would be for volume, to focus more on hypertrophy. Second pillar of how I felt like this came about was nutrition. So not particularly good for the environment, but my red meat intake increased significantly over that period. I started incorporating very specific, very random, a lot more Droevors and a lot more ribeye steaks. I'd probably eat ribeye 2 to 3 times a week, and I ate Droevors probably every day. And as I said, not the most sustainable way to eat, but I definitely saw huge benefits for my strength. I think it's because both of those food sources have got a very high level of energy in them because they're quite fatty. Ribeye is a very fatty cut, therefore it's very calorie dense, and then obviously it's also very high in protein. The same goes for Droevors. I like the Frankie Fenner Droevors, which has got a lot of fat in it, so that again is adding a lot to your calorie intake. And as I said previously, that's very important for building strength, especially if you're in an ultra prep where I'm doing 6 to 8 runs a week. So, that's a very high volume of running, and you need to figure out how to get in enough food to offset that expenditure of energy. And then third, is napping. I napped a lot. It was during a time where I was very hands-on in Horizon, the business. I'm still very hands-on, but when I refer to hands-on in that period, I was opening every day and I was closing every day. So I was up at 5 a.m. and only going to sleep at like 9:30, which sounds early, but it's still, I would have liked to have been in bed earlier, but obviously the gym only closed at 9. So that was tough, but I managed to supplement my sleep by squeezing in 1 or 2, 8 to 25-minute naps in the day. And I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but it adds up and it helps. It helps a lot because, and it was Matt Fraser, I think he was 4-time CrossFit Games champion, who said if sleep were, I think he said if the benefits of sleep could be put into a capsule, it would be a banned substance. And that's because the impact sleep has on your cognitive function, on your physiological well-being, on your emotional state, it's literally like a miracle drug. If you can sleep more, if you can sleep better, if you can optimize your sleep, your performance across the board is going to skyrocket. And I think that was something that I focused a lot on. So lifting frequency, nutrition, and sleep were the 3 pillars I'd say that helped me build strength whilst prepping for an ultra. Yeah, it's something that it takes some time to hone it in, but once you get everything figured out in terms of how it's going to fit around your schedule and what foods work for you in terms of convenience and taste preferences, because that's also a big thing. You've got to figure out what foods you actually like, because otherwise it's difficult to eat a lot of them. But I think what's also a piece of information that people have asked me is what did a week of training look like? So obviously when you're looking to progress in anything, whether it's in work or in life or in relationships or whatever, there's typically a kind of scaled up approach where you start at a certain point and then you increase from there. And the same happened with the training. So every week did not look like this, but this would be like a typical working week training wise. I'd say kind of deep in the prep, so like the real kind of business end of the prep when things got nice and tough. And typically it would be an upper body lift on a Monday, so bench press, lower body lift, as well as a hard run and then an easy run on a Tuesday. So that's 3 workouts on a Tuesday. Wednesday, an easy run and then an optional upper body lift. Thursday, the same as Tuesday. So easy run, hard run, and lower body lift. And then Friday would be another easy run or a spin on the watt bike. Saturday would be, and then an optional upper body lift. And then Saturday would be a long run, mainly vert focused. So that's anywhere from 2.5 to, I don't know, 7 hours running around in the mountains trying to get a lot of vert. I usually like to go and do Lion's Head and then potentially also do Platter Clip and then Devil's Peak, and then if I've got time I'll do Devil's Peak again. So basically just going up and down the mountains for as many hours as I have to until the workout's finished. And then Sunday was a long run again, but it was a shorter long run, so it'd probably be like 2 to 4 hours typically. And that is what a training week kind of ended up looking like in terms of balancing the lifting and the running in order to build, and with that formula, strength and endurance increased. Obviously, if you had to do that without sleeping enough and without eating enough, you'd probably get severely injured because it's a very high training load. And also, if you had to do that from the get-go without sufficient periodization to that point, you'd also probably have a serious problem because that load is very high, and you're not just going to wake up and then do 15 hours a week of training. Your body's going to protest. It's going to say, what are you doing? Stop that. It's too much. But that is kind of a snapshot of what a full training week would look like. I definitely would say upon reflection that the thing that ended up suffering the most was social life. Like that definitely took a bit of a knock because I was prioritizing sleep so much. But when social life didn't take a knock, then I would just sleep less and then I'd make up for it in naps, which also wasn't ideal. But that's kind of, that is basically the formula that I used to PR on my bench and run ultras, which is something that I've been asked about a lot. And when it comes to a hybrid training, as I said, nutrition is very important. And how's Peter? I think specifically when you're looking at an endurance, in kind of an endurance sport, the two things you want to look at the most are just obviously caloric intake first and foremost. Are you eating enough? But thereafter, you want to look at carbohydrates, and then you also, from a micronutrient point of view, you want to look at your electrolytes, so sodium, potassium, magnesium, calcium. These things will make sure that those what are they called? Not action potentials. Basically, that the muscles are working properly, that the signals your brain's telling your muscles, like the messages that it's giving, they're firing correctly and it's preventing cramp and it's not causing these kind of these confused messages. Because when you put your body into a state of survival, it demands a lot from a nutrient standpoint, and you want to make sure that all the pathways that are working are kind of well lubricated, so to speak. So electrolytes are very important for that. And it's something that you can either look at through salting your food. That's obviously got a bunch of sodium in it, and other sorts of supplements can help as well. Something that I like to make use of is Revive. It's kind of the go-to electrolyte supplement in South Africa. There are other alternatives, but I personally think the formulation on Revive is probably the best, and also the flavors are quite nice. And it's something that I'll use for daily use, just to kind of supplement my electrolyte intake, and then also in training. I find that during a training run or after a big training session, having a Revive helps me a lot. So in terms of, as I said, onto the next thing, but in terms of, like I said, the whole time investment, so that's obviously one thing that should be considered when it comes to hybrid training, is how it's difficult enough as it is to pick one. So if you want to get into lifting or if you want to get into running, those are both they can both be very time consuming. So in terms of how you actually optimize your time to get those things in, I would recommend getting a coach, to be honest, because that kind of weekly schedule set out for you helps you prioritize time in a way that you can get your training done. So either get a coach or sit on every Sunday, look at your week, and then plan your training sessions accordingly, because that gives you a kind of understanding of, okay, on this day I've got that, on this day I've got that, and then you can shift things around accordingly based off of your priorities. And I think another important thing to touch on is if we go back to kind of the training load and periodizing into a very high kind of volume training regimen, a big thing is, with all of this load, how do we mitigate injuries? Like, how do we get around something like that? Because it is quite a lot to ask of your body to be training that much and to be training at that intensity. I think knowing what level you are at in terms of what base do you have, and then kind of scaling your goal accordingly is very important. So if you are coming from couch, then start very, very small. Don't go, it's fun to kind of get motivated by Goggins and everything and want to go and run 100 miles, but don't do that, because that's not sustainable. Yes, you're probably going to do it if you've got the mindset, but you are most likely going to leave that with a serious issue. Even me personally, to be honest, the first official event that I entered, endurance event that I entered, was the Two Oceans Ultra. It was 17 days before the event. The entries were actually closed, and I emailed and I WhatsApped and I phone called and I basically pestered the organizers to give me an entry. And I'd never run an ultra. I had run an ultra. But I'd never done like an official event before where you enter. I'd just run far by myself. And I did that, and I seriously messed up my foot. It was a very bad idea. It was a lot of fun, and like I said, you can probably finish, but how your body's going to feel afterwards is going to be hugely influenced by the level of your preparation and what your base is. So, like I said, if you're going from couch, take it easy. Kind of ease your way into it and build towards something. Ultras are typically things that people who are a little bit more seasoned in their running start going down the road of, and that's usually people who have been running from, I don't know, anywhere from 6, 7, 8 to 10 years plus. They only start looking at ultras, and that's just because you want to be able to allow your body to actually become conditioned to deal with that kind of impact and that kind of stimulus. Because I've worked with a lot of people who come from sporting backgrounds that involve running and that are high volume sports and involve cardiovascular, but it's very different to running on the road or running in the mountains, and you actually need to give your body the time to become to adapt to that new kind of ask, and that just takes time. That's not something you can rush, and if you do rush it, you're most likely going to pick up an injury. Another very helpful injury prevention tool is strength training. So in this way, hybrid training is actually very helpful, because if you strengthen your body sufficiently and everything is robust and durable, you'll actually be able to cope with the endurance stuff you're doing better. And you want to look at muscles that are taking strain off of the mainly impacted joints, things like your knees, your ankles, your hips. These areas are often going to take a lot of the impact when you are running. So you want to look at strengthening your posterior chain a lot, so your calves, so the upper, so gastrocnemius, soleus. You want to be doing your hamstrings. You want to be doing your glutes. These are all very important muscles that are going to help take a lot of the strain off of your knees and your lower back and your hips. You also want to focus a lot on your VMO. And how you're going to do that is, so that's part of your quad. You're gonna focus on eccentrically loading, so slow negative repetitions on squat variations, and ideally with an elevated heel, because this essentially mimics running downhill in a controlled environment, so in a controlled situation where you can really load up the weight, get a lot of weight, a lot of load on your back, and then slowly lower that down and control the movement, and then you can come up quickly. And what that's going to do is going to help insulate your knees from this high impact that you're going to be putting them under when you're running downhill, which happens a lot running on the road and running on the mountains especially. So focusing a lot on strengthening that lower body is going to do you a world of good in terms of injury prevention. There's also a lot of stuff that you want to do in terms of stability, so making use of a foam pad, that's going to help you a lot with your ankles. That's going to help different stabilizer muscles that all play a role in running and jumping from one foot to the next, which effectively is what running is. It's going to help strengthen those muscles. So like I said, focusing on the posterior chain, so glutes, hamstrings, calves, and then also looking at your quads for that eccentric loading, and then focusing a lot on single leg stuff, so balance work and just single leg deadlifts or single leg RDLs rather, and kind of balancing on the foam pad. That's also really going to bring about significant conditioning and strength in those areas that will be asked of a lot when you're doing your running. And then also, obviously, for something like your calves, doing single leg calf raises as opposed to both. You know, a small change in your movement like that is going to have a significant return for your time investment on your strength training. And then we also obviously want to tick all the boxes for fundamental strength. So I would still recommend getting in some form of upper workout. It can be significantly shorter than any of the other stuff you're doing. It's not a priority. I would definitely prioritize your lower, but you're definitely not going to notice any adverse effects if you make sure to tick that box of doing upper as well, because as much as running is a lower body movement, you're still engaging elements of your upper. You're still going to, especially if you're on the trail, you're going to use your arms. If you fall, you know, you want to be able to catch yourself. If you're kind of on a very steep incline, you want to be able to haul yourself up. So the strength component of running is very important, and that's what I find kind of interesting about kind of having a separate term for mixing lifting and running, because in order for you to actually have a comprehensive running plan, there should be significant amounts of strength training in there. You should at least be doing 2 lifts a week, because your body, yes, is going to improve its running capabilities by being put through running workouts, but in order to, like I said, mitigate injury, you want to make sure that you're actually strong and that your fundamental strength is there. So I've touched on how I structure my weeks training-wise. I've touched on conditioning and injury prevention. We've spoken about what hybrid training actually is, the role of sleep, the role of nutrients. Oh, this one is very, very important too. So I'm glad I went through everything. So another thing is with strength training, just to kind of close the chapter on that, is yes, okay, Seb, I must do strength training, I must do this exercise, I must work on these muscles, but what rep ranges, how many sets, what does that even mean? You know, what should these workouts look like? Typically, if you're wanting to get stronger, let me take us back. If you do no strength training and you do some strength training, you will get stronger. You can do pretty much anything, but your body's going to be like, oh my goodness, I've not done this before. I'm going to adapt. I'm going to get stronger. However, if you have done some strength training before, or you want to get stronger quicker and more effectively without overloading your body unnecessarily, you should typically be looking to do anywhere between 3 to 6 reps. Anything over 5 reps starts to become a little bit, you know, you're creeping into muscle building, you're creeping into hypertrophy, and this is just a generally accepted method for strength and hypertrophy. Like I said, if you don't do any strength training and you do something, you're going to get stronger pretty much regardless. Beginner gains, amazing thing. But you know, you can be more effective and efficient with your strength training if you are very intentional about the number of reps that you do. So focusing on going nice and heavy. So you should be feeling, if we're using a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being effortless and 10 being max out, almost impossible, you want to be in that 3 to 5 rep range. But on that scale, you'd probably want to be 6.5 to 8.5. Like, that's where you want to be in terms of an effort level. So when you finish that 5th rep, it should be a real push, but you might have 1 maybe 1.5 reps left. That's kind of where you want to play. You don't want to go too hard, but you want to be putting in a significant amount of effort, and you want to focus on the quality of executing your reps, because there's a lot of, we've got this community track night run club that's in Cape Town. They have a Friday morning run called Junk Miles. The same principle of junk miles in terms of the term can apply to junk volume in lifting. Like, there's a lot of junk volume. It's like, what is your actual goal? I want to get stronger. Okay, then don't lift more than 8 reps, 6 to 8 reps. It's like yes, it's going to help you, but it's not actually entirely necessary, in my opinion. And typically from my experience and with clients and from the literature, that's where things point to. It's keep the repetitions low, keep the quality high, and don't overexert yourself. You don't want to lift to the point that you are struggling to recover to repeat a workout the next day. So that's kind of in a nutshell from A to Z, or from A to P to R to Z, the way that I kind of covered it. That is hybrid training, and how to really optimize the way that you lift and run, and what a big week's load looks like, and what that requires. I thought it also, something that has come up is that I thought I'd like to share is, what is next on the horizon in terms of what I'll be doing for my next hybrid challenge. So, well, not hybrid challenge, just my next physical challenge. So there are a couple of things in the short-term pipeline that might happen. One may be High Rocks, the other may be 13 Peaks with 2 of my clients who I'm coaching to do 13 Peaks. Whether the 2 of those, so those are on a very similar timeline, so it's going to end up being one or the other. And I'll be able to kind of know what is going to happen with that in the next couple of days, which is very exciting, and I will share that with everyone when I've committed to it. And then on the longer time horizon is something really interesting that I've never done before, and that is actually kind of the big plan, and that is to embark on more of an adventure race. So this will be self-supported, this will be kind of unmarked, this will be self-navigated, and it's going to be in a really awesome environment. So the concept is to do a salt pan crossing in Namibia around June, July 2025. We're going to look for about a 200-ish kilometer stretch, and then do a crossing of that, like I said, self-supported, self-navigated, and whatnot. So what's going to be interesting about that is, how we transport nutrition, because it's self-supported. I'm not going to have people carrying my food and water. I'm going to be carrying that myself. And obviously, to carry food and water for that distance requires a lot of planning. Logistics are very important. Dosing the nutrition to the point that we aren't wasting, or as in provisioning too much or too little as well, because every gram or kilogram counts, because that over that period of time is going to end up being cumulatively very heavy. But that's what's next. The training is going to be very different. It's going to be a big production in terms of how we pull everything together, but looking forward to that. And I think that's going to involve a bunch of training that will be very insightful for you guys. So if you've got any questions about that, or about any kind of hybrid related or coaching related things, or just lifestyle related things in terms of how to be more active, and how to, I suppose, live better, let us know. Happy to answer that on the podcast. But thanks for tuning in, and we will catch you all in the next episode.
Thank you so much for listening to the show, guys. We love answering specific questions. So if there's anything you want to know, leave a comment or reach out to us directly at HorizonZA on Instagram, or email us at movement@horizongym.com. Until next time, I'm your host, Seb Prentice, and this is Beyond Physical.